There are good leaders and there are bad leaders. As we walk through the scriptures, we hear that Israel cried out for their king, their own king, like every other nation, and God gave them Saul. Saul was a good king for a while, but then he got caught up in the trappings of power and wanting to do things his way. And God named a new king as Samuel anointed David as the second king of Israel. So Israel's kingship would not be passed down through Saul's line, but David's line. Then David had a son, and his name was Solomon, and he would continue to lead Israel. But under King Solomon, there was wealth and there was prosperity, and he was one of the wisest men on earth, but he also increased taxes to a pretty uncomfortable spot for the people of Israel. And when his time on this earth was about over, he chose Rehoboam, his son, to be his successor. Now, Rehoboam had a chance to change things. The advisors of his father said, why don't you lower taxes? Why don't you make it easier on the people, and they will surely adore you? But Rehoboam listened to his younger advisors who said, no, tax them even more. Make them give even more of what they own to you. And he chose to tax them heavier. And this created a great divide. 12 tribes of Israel, and 2 ended up following Rehoboam, and 10 ended up following a different king at that time called Jeroboam. So Rehoboam, it became the nation of Judah, and Israel became a different, kind of the same nation but divided. They followed Jeroboam. Now we have a kingdom divided, 2 different kings, 2 different nations. And in the midst of this, Israel never had a good king. Think about that. Their heritage is to follow Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and yet not one king encouraged their people to follow the true God. Now on the other side, in Judah, there were a few good kings, not many, but like Josiah, but not many of them. And God didn't like this at all. Several hundred years of his people worshiping false gods. So now we have these 2 kingdoms living side by side in the lands that God had given them as divided by Joshua, but following different kings. And they didn't follow God. Only in a few instances on the side of Judah did they decide to follow the one true God, Yahweh, and worship him appropriately. They worshiped all kinds of other false gods, Baal or Baal, and so many others, which you'll hear about when we talk about Elijah. But they didn't follow God. And in these windows of time, as he had sent the judges in the past to be his mouthpiece, now God begins to send prophets, are God's mouthpiece on earth, sharing God's messages with his people. But the people didn't always listen. From the time of Solomon to the end of the Old Testament, there is all kinds of turmoil as God's people did not follow his ways. There would be brief returns under King Josiah and a few other good kings, but mostly the people did not listen to the prophets. But throughout it all, there was this strain that pointed to a Messiah that would deliver them. So today we begin to dig into the prophet Elijah, one of God's powerful prophets, a mouthpiece speaking God's truth into a nation of unbelief. I hope you enjoy this study of Elijah and the widow of Zarephath, and Elijah in the battle versus the prophets of Baal.